powerful, and he is mostly, well, he's a sitting member of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, right? Sitting member. And he is a judge, a prosecutor. He's a former judge, former prosecutor, and he is very outspoken on the failed drug war. He's a published author. And I'm really proud to have him speak to us tonight, because this is just something that's going on in our country that needs to come to an end. And I'm so happy that Judge Gray has stepped up to the plate. And he's also the vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party. So let's give him a warm welcome. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Can you get the music turned off?
Okay, good evening. Now I've done my duty. I'm in uniform now, but I'm going to take off my jacket and tie so I'll feel better. So thank you.
Thank you.
I am a former drug warrior, as I would call it. I was in the, first of all, Navy JAG. Actually wrote out the charge sheets against a lot of shipmates for various things, certainly including drug policy. Thereafter, I was a federal prosecutor in Los Angeles. Actually held the record for the largest drug prosecution in the Central District of California back in 1978. 75 kilos of heroin, 165 pounds was and is a whole bunch of heroin. Didn't really think much about it. I was pretty much raised the way everybody in our world was. That you start equating heroin with bad, with evil, with prison. You don't really think about it. It's just the way you kind of come about. By the way, does anybody have a concept of what the record prosecution is today in the Central District of California? 18 tons of cocaine in one place, so you can see what kind of progress we're making in this whole thing. But again, didn't really think about it that much until I was on the bench. I actually began as a trial court judge in Orange County in California at the end of 1983, so quite a while, and I was on the bench for 25 years. It took me maybe 2 or 3 years watching in my own courtroom, seeing us churn low-level drug offenders through the system for no good purpose, and feeling, you know, even when we would arrest and convict and incarcerate big-time dealers selling pounds of narcotics or whatever else, does that mean now that there is no cocaine in Santa Ana or wherever? No, it just means that somebody else views this as an employment opportunity, and within about an hour and a half, they're off there selling the same drugs in the same area. So I finally looked around and decided, why doesn't somebody do something about this? We just have to start discussing it openly. And then pretty much figured out who better than me. I'll leave it to you, but fairly clean-cut person. I've never used any form of illicit substances. Conservative judge in a conservative county, and I have all of this experience. I'm going to talk about it. Yes. So I did something very unusual for a sitting trial court judge. Back on April the 8th of 1992, more than 20 years ago, I held a press conference and stated my conclusions that what we're doing isn't working. We've got to put our heads together and come up with something else. And actually that something else will work, because we couldn't do this worse if we tried. So I have been speaking about this publicly ever since. And the reason that I got to know Governor Gary Johnson here is that, and I'd never heard of him before, but while he was the sitting governor of New Mexico, he did the same thing. 1999, held a press conference after what he called conducting his own audit, figured out that the war on drugs is counterproductive, not working, put in definite specific changes in the law and changes in the actions of the government of New Mexico. He had obviously no political constituency for doing this. He had no political benefit and took quite a bit of heat. Nevertheless, it was the right thing to do, and that's what he did. So that certainly got my attention. The man has courage. He sees things. He eventually asked me to be his running mate, because I was calling him the most qualified person to be president of the United States that I know of. And it's true. Not only for this reason, but pretty much everything else. And so he asked me to be his running mate, and I said I will do it under one condition, and that condition is that we run to win. And none of this moral victory stuff, none of this, oh, let's make a good showing. Although now that we're not in the debates, at least not so far, we're still going to file another action probably on Friday or Monday in Washington. So we're still working for the other 2 presidential debates, but the vice presidential debate will come and go. It's the day after tomorrow, and I will not be a part of it, which is just crushing for me. I was going to give anything to be able to debate against Joe Biden, and I was just looking forward to it. But that may not happen. But one way or the other, we're in it for the long term, and we're going to continue to discuss these issues. What is happening today to our country? I have now called the war on drugs, drug prohibition, the biggest failed policy in the history of the United States of America, second only to slavery. And I mean it, and it's true. And usually I will begin my discussions exactly that way. Get people's attention, they know exactly what I'm talking about, and then I will ask them, challenge them, come up with any area in our society today that you want to. I don't care, healthcare, environment, prison, whatever you want to talk about, I will show you how it's made worse because of our policy of drug prohibition. And I go around talking to schools and everything too. And even very conservative or very religious, whatever types of groups, it doesn't matter. Just begin with the following question that I use pretty much wherever I go, and that is, forget my experience, use your own. How many of you believe that we in our great country are in better shape today than we were 5 years ago with regard to this critical issue of drug abuse and all the crime and misery that goes with it? And nobody will raise their hands. So now we're together. Now, in fact, regardless of what this group is, can be religious group, chamber of commerce, service club, doesn't matter, we're all together. Because then you say, well, what's the first conclusion after you reach that understanding? You have no reasonable expectation of being in better shape next year than you're in today, unless we change our approach. And doesn't that make sense? And everybody, yes, kind of nods their head. So then you just get into the statistics, and now you've got them beat. Because the United States of America leads the world in the incarceration of our people, both by sheer numbers as well as per capita. And there's this fellow by the name of Jim Webb, who is even still a congressman a senator from Virginia, who was looking at these statistics and came out, he was actually on the front cover of Parade magazine, said, I've looked at these statistics, either the United States of America is the most evil people in the world, or we're doing something wrong. Right. Which do you think it is? So all of the statistics favor this. So I was in the offices of two sitting congressmen, one-on-one in Orange County, two conservative Republican congressmen, and I was running for Congress, so I was trying to get their endorsement, which I did not get, by the way. But in fact, I was running against a fellow named Bob Dornan, who you may or may not remember, so they were kind of committed to him. But one way or the other, in their own words, they told me the same thing, individually, and they said, Jim, you don't understand. Most people in Washington realize the war on drugs is not winnable, but it's eminently fundable, and they're addicted to the drug war funding. So folks, when it comes down to it, it's money. It's simply money. Money is driving the bus, because you have the good guys and the bad guys that have an amazing partnership here. They're both prospering because of the war on drugs. Now, obviously, the bad guys, the big-time drug dealers and stuff, are making hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars a year, tax-free, and they're laughing at us because no one in law enforcement will tell you with a straight face that we seize more than 10% of the illegal drugs in our society, and the more candid ones will tell you the truth, which is it's about 5%. So every time you see yet another photo opportunity with another ton of cocaine seized or something like that, it's not a victory, folks. It's just a symptom of the depth of the problem, because for every ton we seize, we're failing to see somewhere between 10 and 15 tons, and now you're beginning to understand the problem. So that isn't working, but law enforcement continues, of course, to also prosper because their fiefdoms, their bureaucracies, whatever, continue to expand. They continue to get more money. They continue to get more power. They continue to get more leverage in our society. So you have the good guys and the bad guys combined. Otherwise, who is winning? We have the drug dealers. We have the police. We have every juvenile gang in our country is basically getting its primary source of funding from what? The sale of illegal drugs. We might as well take out a billboard here or anywhere else. Hey kids, we all realize there aren't many Michael Jordans in this world. You know, your chances of being a Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or whatever are small. But if you want to make some money, you'll never, ever be able to make as much money as you can by selling drugs. And in fact, you can go to a high school during the summer, and it literally happens. You know, the high school kids gather, and one guy's a drug dealer, and he goes up to somebody and says, "You're working, aren't you?" "Yeah." "Where are you working?" "Oh, I'm working at a car wash, McDonald's, whatever it happens to be." "Really? How much money did you make last week?" "Oh, you know, I made $180. $180? You know, I can make twice that much in an afternoon selling drugs." And he's right, and the kids know it. So it's subverting our kids. It is drawing them into this lifestyle of drug usage and drug selling. And if that isn't enough to do it, ask yourself, if I'm an adult drug dealer, how much risk-taking can I buy for $50 in cash from a kid in the inner city or anywhere else? And the answer is quite a bit, right? $50 is nothing to an adult drug dealer, but to a kid, that's a lot of money. So I recruit them, and I have them as a cheap source of labor, and I can get all the kids I want. And I use them as gophers, I use them as lookouts, I use them as couriers, whatever. And I would see this day in and day out in juvenile court. As soon as their reliability is established, I will trust them to go out and sell small amounts of drugs in the communities. Why would I do that? Really easy, because I make more money, they make more money. Ask yourself this question, and this one should send you off howling into the streets, because it's what is corrupting our society today. If you have a 15, 16-year-old selling drugs in his or her community, who are these kids going to be selling to? People like us? No, they're going to be selling to their 14, 15, 16-year-old peers, thus recruiting more children into this very lifestyle of drug usage and drug selling that we say we're trying to keep away from them, and it is caused by drug prohibition. Couldn't do it worse if we tried. Simply could not. Don't take my word for it. Ask the next 10 teenagers you find. What is easier for you to get if you want to? Alcohol or marijuana? And everybody will say, if you want to, it's much easier to get marijuana. Why? Because the alcohol is regulated and controlled by the government, and the illegal drugs are controlled by illegal drug dealers, and they don't ask for ID, do they? Today, you do not see high school kids selling Jim Beam bourbon to each other in their high school campuses. They could, but there's no money in it, right? So they don't do it, but they're selling methamphetamines or cocaine or whatever all the time. Take that beyond. Talk about Mexican drug cartels that are clearly winning. Today you do not see Mexican drug cartels raising illegal vineyards in our national forests in competition with Robert Mondavi. They could, but there's no money in it. But they're raising illegal marijuana all the time, and in fact they're doing it in our national forest because it's a lot more sensible to do that than smuggle the junk across the border. Although they actually have those catapults now, I'm told. Actually, a good friend of mine lives in San Diego, and his son works for ICE. And he says now the latest thing is they have these huge catapults about half a mile into Mexico, and they catapult bales of marijuana over our border half a mile into our country. Why not? You know, you know, if there's a will, if there's money is here, I mean, come on. If the demand is here, the demand will be met. You cannot repeal the law of supply and demand. It's going to be here. So we could absolutely bulldoze the entire country of Colombia if you wanted to. Absolutely obliterate it from the face of the earth. It won't make any difference at all with regard to our drug problems here. In fact, you can take Ecuador and Peru with it too if you want to. Won't make the slightest bit of difference with regard to our problems. Why? Because if the demand is not met by Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, it'll be met by Nigeria, or Thailand, or Burma, Myanmar Republic, or California. Guess what the largest cash crop is today in the state of California? It is marijuana. Number 2 is grapes, okay? So every time we drive through those miles of vineyards, understand marijuana is a bigger cash crop than grapes. So what are we doing here? Why are we doing this? Why are we corrupting our children? Just talking to the doctor over here and about all of these various other problems where the government, the police, are using all of these resources to prosecute marijuana. For heaven's sake, it's something like every 34 seconds in our country, there's an arrest in our country for marijuana. Every 34 seconds, there's an arrest in our country for marijuana, and 85% of those arrests are for possession, only for possession. Imagine the amount of energy, of resources that go into that. This is what really pushed me over the edge as a sitting trial court judge in Orange County. Literally, the tougher you get on nonviolent drug offenses, the softer you get with regard to the prosecution of robbery, rape, and murder.
That's what I'm saying.
Come on, that's what we need to understand. I've written a book, in fact, Rain mentioned this. I've written a book entitled Why Our Drug Laws Have Failed and What We Can Do About It, a judicial indictment of the war on drugs. Probably the longest book title you've ever heard. Title, you know.
Microphone check.
One way or the other.
Where can we buy the
He's
book?
working.
I don't know. Okay. It's on Amazon. I have some cards here that mention this. But one way, in fact, it's been endorsed actually by 4 people that really excite me. One of them is Governor Gary Johnson. While he was the governor of New Mexico, we built up a relationship, and that was nice of him. The other 3, by the way, Milton Friedman, who's always been a hero of mine, George Shultz, who was the Secretary of State under that real liberal Ronald Reagan, and then Walter Cronkite, who actually, I guess, has the school just over here for ASU. So you figure though you can get those 4 people together on anything. But in my book, it actually cites federal government statistics showing we were twice as successful in 1980 of prosecuting homicides as we were in 1990, which means, in effect, we were only half as successful in 1990 prosecuting homicides as we had been in 1980. Why? Because the Reagan administration once again ratcheted up the prosecution of nonviolent drug offenses, and we only have so many resources in our criminal justice system. And to the degree that we're doing these undercover sting operations, you don't understand. If you're going to do an undercover sting operation, it's a dangerous thing, and you've got to have a lot of protection. You've got about 5 people surveilling for every 1 undercover officer, and actually they say in Los Angeles, if there's a certain amount of government money, more than $100,000 at risk, you also have to have a helicopter in the sky. I mean, all of this stuff, the resources, and you fill out all these reports, and then you have all these people testifying, and all of this sort of stuff. It is phenomenal. I was actually in a drug policy forum, this is numbers of years ago now, in which the chief of police of Palm Springs was there. And actually, he read my book, so I thought he was a really insightful guy. And he was a good guy. But I asked him, Chief, how many sworn police officers do you have on your police force? And I don't remember the number, but it was a small police force, let's say 50. Okay. Of those, how many of your sworn police officers are involved full-time or a major part of their times on drug cases? And he said, of the 50, about 6. I said, okay. Chief, how many of those sworn police officers are involved full-time or at least major part-time on burglaries? And he smiled and said, oh no, we don't do that. We don't have the resources. I mean, that's where we are, folks. Sure, we're spending all of these resources on drug cases. So, let me ask you, how many people here have had their car or their house burglarized? Quite a few. Let me ask you a question. When you found out what had happened, what did you do? Call the police. What happened then? They came out eventually.
Yes.
What happened when they came out? They wrote a report. Okay, critical question. Did they use the report to investigate and try to find the perpetrator? No. What do you use the police report for? Filing your insurance. They don't have the resources to prosecute burglars. If they were to use these undercover monies to a sting operation on car burglaries, you know, these chop shops, all this other stuff, they could really reduce the number of car burglaries, the number of house burglaries, but we don't do it because we're out there chasing drug dealers. You know, if you arrest and incarcerate a serial rapist in our society, rape's going to go down in that community. But you arrest and incarcerate a drug dealer, it doesn't have any effect whatsoever. So you can continue, I can go on talking about this sort of stuff, I've done it for years, but you get the idea. So what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
You know, we're getting there. People are beginning to understand. You are aware, I'm hoping, that in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, there are initiatives on the ballot now for November to treat marijuana like alcohol. How many people here know someone that votes in Colorado, Washington, or Oregon? Get on the phone, get on your email, talk to these people, and strongly encourage them to vote in favor of these initiatives. Yes, I understand there's the supremacy clause. Yes, I understand, even in California, where we led the country with regard to Prop 215 and medical marijuana, back in 1996, my goodness, that was 18 years ago, and I still really indict Sacramento and these other folks for not putting in just some procedures that are understandable by everybody, including the police, which you just have to be concerned about as well. But the dispensaries, the patients, the police, everybody, we don't have those. But it's still a violation of federal law. I understand that. And in fact, to backtrack a little bit, I read Obama's books. I read where seemingly he wrote his books and seemingly he wasn't under any pressure. He acknowledged openly that while he was community organizing in Chicago, he used marijuana regularly. And he even used cocaine, according to him in his book. If Mr. Obama were here right now, Mr. Obama, I would ask you, would it have assisted your career to have been arrested and convicted of smoking marijuana or using cocaine? And the answer, of course, has to be no. Why are you doing this now? Why are you continuing to prosecute these things? Why are you closing down medical marijuana dispensaries? George W. Bush, for heaven's sake, pretty much acknowledged that when he was young and a playboy and all the rest of that stuff, he used cocaine. George W. Bush, if you may remember, while he was governor of Texas, signed a legislation into law mandating anybody that uses cocaine must go to jail a minimum of 180 days. I mean, talk about hypocrisy. I'm asking all of you to assist me in coining a new word in our society, and the word is a swaggart. Now, what does that mean? It means somebody that's beyond hypocrisy, somebody that not only talks against something, but preaches about it. And like Jimmy Swaggart, by the way. And the Swaggart I know of course, is J. Edgar Hoover, who was preaching against homosexuality and doing all this other stuff on the side. But these guys, George W. Bush, President Obama, these guys are swaggarts. Let's call hypocrisy what it is and call it to people's attention. We have something on the order of 20 million people in our society today, in our country, that use marijuana pretty much on a regular basis, at least within a year. We lead the world in the incarceration of our people by having 2.3 million people incarcerated. And as a friend of mine once said, what would happen if tomorrow everybody that uses marijuana in our country were to line up in front of their local police departments with their baggie of marijuana in one hand and their signed confession on the other? It would take us a year and a half working 24 hours a day, processing one of them every 10 seconds before they could all be processed. What are we going to do with them? Even if we wanted to. So the answer, you heard it here first, I'm sorry to say, is I'm a libertarian. I believe in responsibility. I believe, of course, in liberty as well. The answer is, let's use the criminal justice system the way it was designed, which is to hold people accountable for their actions, to hold people accountable for what they do. So, you all know who Robert Downey Jr. is. Robert Downey Jr. is always going to have a heroin problem. He's going to have that craving. He's doing pretty well now, as I understand it, but he's going to have to be careful. He is a heroin-addicted person. It makes as much sense to me to put Robert Downey Jr. in jail for his heroin usage as it would have Betty Ford in jail for her alcohol usage. And of course, Betty Ford was President Gerald Ford's wife, and she was an acknowledged alcoholic. It's the same thing, isn't it? It's a medical issue.
Yes.
So bring them closer to medical professionals that can help them instead of rendering them criminals and pushing them farther away and taking all of these resources. That's the answer. Hold people accountable for what they do, but not what they put into their bodies. And then my libertarian philosophy also, it goes even beyond that. The government has as much right to control what I as an adult put into my body as it does what I put into my mind. It's none of their business. You or I tonight could go home and drink 12 martinis if we wanted to. Clearly not a healthy thing to do, not a smart thing to do, but not a violation of law, nor should it be. Unless, of course, what? If I drive a motor vehicle under the influence of alcohol, or I beat up my wife, or hit you over the head with a pool cue, that's different. Hold me accountable for my actions, or by driving under the influence, I'm putting your safety at risk. Legitimate criminal justice function. And when we finally go back to that, we will make amazing progress. Today, when we're in Arizona, last time I looked, Mexico, directly south of you. Mexico has an enormous problem. Mexico has lost something in the order of 60,000 people, 60,000 deaths, violent deaths, in the last 5 years because of President Calderon's war on drugs.
Oh, God.
You know something? It has nothing to do with drugs whatsoever. Completely nothing to do with drugs. It's all drug money. And it's our drug money that's done it. What is that? How does that make you feel? You know, it's our drug money, and then of course we get into the guns that go from, they use the drug money to come up here and buy the guns, and we don't particularly care, and that, you know, all this stuff, and the Fast and Furious and everything else too. Big government, you gotta know, is really, really good at one thing, and that is increasing the size, the power, the expense of big government. And that's what we've been doing. And it's not only this, we are beginning to live in a police state, folks. The soul of the United States of America is what? Is our freedoms and our liberties, and our soul is under attack by our very own government today. Yes, the war on drugs. In fact, in my book, I cite how the war on drugs, just using United States Supreme Court cases involving drug transactions, we have lost our Fourth Amendment rights. Search and seizure, I just show it. It's something to be really discouraged about. And particularly when you lose your civil liberties, you never get them back from the government. Are we in better shape today because we've lost our civil liberties? And the answer, of course, is no. These are things to really worry about. When we were, Governor Johnson and I actually, about the second to the last time I've seen him, we were in Tampa together, right before the Republican National Convention, celebrating Ron Paul and trying to tell his family, in effect, that we're all in the same family. And there was a front page article, front page headlines in the Tampa, I think it's Tampa Tribune in Tampa. And it said, the Obama administration has acknowledged that they're not going to have drones flying over the city of Tampa during the Republican National Convention. Okay, what does that mean? Normally this is the exception. Normally we would have drones flying over. And the answer, regretfully, is yes, that today increasingly we do have drones flying over our cities and our towns in our country. You know, soon they will be, if not already, following you in your car and be able to traipse through there and watch where you go and all the rest. None of them have missiles on them as far as I know, but you know, it's just another intrusion into our lives. Where is Paul Revere? Why is no one spreading the alarm? Once again, when you lose your civil liberties, you lose them to the government forever. The soul of our country, the thing that makes us special, the thing that makes us who we are, our freedoms and our liberties, and our soul today is under attack by our very own government. Who stands for bringing freedom back to the United States of America? Not Romney, not Obama. In so many ways, they are together on so many different issues. It's Governor Gary Johnson that stands in favor of repealing this war on drugs and allowing each state to decide how best to protect and serve its people, to not have any drones flying over our country. This so-called Patriot Act, and I always call it so-called Patriot Act, direct frontal assault on our civil liberties, does not make us safer, allows the federal government to go into your bank account, prohibits your bank from even telling you that they've checked your bank records. All in this name of what? Terrorism? The war on terrorism? Just like we were talking about earlier with Andre. He equated it, it's like having not a war against Germany during the Second World War, but a war against Nazism. Had we declared a war on Nazism in 1941, we'd still be at war. You can't declare a war on an idea. War on terrorism, indeed. It's just a means for the government to continue to take away our civil liberties and to keep us afraid, to keep us in fear. The government is doing that from all of these different aspects, and it's not healthy, and it doesn't work. We are raising our people today to be dependent, young and old, to be dependent upon the government. It's a process, and that's where we're going. The Republicans and Democrats are both doing the same thing. Romney and Obama are the same in so many different ways. I actually call them Robomney. They're interchangeable. Today, you look around the world, and we have our military troops in conflicts all over the world. All over the world. In Somalia today, we are fighting. Is Somalia a security threat to the United States of America? And I tell you, no. I say, let's stop that. Let's bring those troops home. The Sudan, same thing. Yemen, same thing. By the way, we have our drones and we're firing our missiles in Yemen, firing our missiles in Pakistan. By the way, people in Pakistan don't particularly like us. I wonder why. You know, we have people driving down the road and we fire a missile just out of nowhere and explode their car. Well, okay, maybe we have killed 17 number 2 Al-Qaedas in the last 3 years. It's amazing how many number 2s they have, but even if that's true, then they have another 6 people in the car with them. That's collateral damage. Sometimes we miss. Sometimes we explode houses. No wonder they're upset with us. The answer is no, we don't do that. That's not what America stands for. We bring these troops home from Afghanistan now. We're not waiting until 2014, not waiting until sometime in the future. We bring them home now. So our country is threatened. I really hate to say this. I'm not a conspiratorial theorist. I'm not all of these sorts of things. But our country is in trouble, guys. I mean, why are Governor Gary Johnson and I doing this? I could be home doing my mediations, and I missed my anniversary with my wife, all that sort of thing. And I know, she said the same thing. Never mind. But our country is in need. Today, you have to understand this. For every dollar the federal government spends, we're borrowing 43 cents. Think of that. For every dollar the federal government now spends, we're either borrowing or printing 43 cents. No company could possibly do this and stay in existence. No household could possibly do this and keep from bankruptcy. Let me tell you a secret. No country can either. We are Greece in so many ways, but when we're in so many ways it's worse because we're bigger. We have an enormous deficit. $16 trillion is our budget deficit, and that's conservative because of all of these other unfunded mandates and the rest. We have added $6 trillion to our budget deficit just these past 4 years. $6 trillion. My generation has made a mess of this, and I regret to say that we're looking to my children, to our children, to pay it back, and our grandchildren are bankrupt. And in fact, it was about 3 weeks ago, I was in Spokane in Washington and was speaking at a lunch. And I got there a little bit early, and I found this 3-year-old boy. His name was Jake, and he was there with his mother. And so I got to know him a little bit. And then as I do, I'll use his name when I'm talking to him, using my discussions. And I said the same thing at this lunch, that yes, my generation's made a mess of this. My children are going to have to pay it back, and Jake is bankrupt. Now, Jake had no idea. He's 3 years old. He didn't know what the word bankrupt meant, but it sounded bad, and he starts to cry. So here I am, a candidate making 3-year-olds cry. I mean, way to go, Jim. But honestly, if he did know what the word bankrupt meant, he had reason to cry. So we are in trouble. You look at Paul Ryan, who is running with, of course, Governor Romney, and this radical budget that he's talking about, if you pencil it out, he doesn't balance the budget for 28 years, assuming some growth that may or may not be there. We say, no, we are going to submit a balanced budget to Congress in 2013. That's serious stuff. First of all, of course, the United States, under the Republicans and Democrats, haven't even had a budget for the last 3 years. We have not had a budget. We're that irresponsible. So how are we going to balance the budget? It means we're going to have to reduce federal government spending by 43%. Now, let's not be naive. We can't pass the budget. That's going to be up to Congress. We'll hold their feet to the fire, but I understand there'll be give and take. But where is that 43% going to come from? It's naive and stupid and harmful to take every budget and cut off 43%. That's stupid. That doesn't work. Actually, there are some parts of government that are actually working, and let's leave them alone or with the rest. But what we will do directly, we will have an audit of the entire federal government using generally accepted accounting principles. It's never happened before, including the Pentagon, including all of the agencies, and we will promulgate this information to all of the people. In any area where you have a problem, they're basically a 3-step process. The first process is you have to realize you have a problem. I think we're there. Number 2 is you have to give honest information. You have to explain the problem. Our audit will do that. And then the third part is people are going to have to share the pain, and there's going to be some pain coming. I am convinced that that's what Americans are. Americans are prepared to do this for the sake of their children, for the sake of their country, as long as they feel that other people are doing the same. So where is this 43% going to come from? Let's start with the military. If we bring our troops home from Afghanistan now, we've already spent $1 trillion there. That will be savings. That's part of the 43%. These other various escapades or military conflicts as well. And then, today, The United States of America has somewhere between 900 and 1,000 bases in foreign countries all around the world. We're not talking about in our country. We're talking about foreign bases all the way around the world. Now look, we're not isolationists. If we need those bases for our defense, I say, fine, keep them there, reinforce them if that's true. But so many of these are not necessary. I submit to you, and we'll look through each one individually, but I submit to you we could close 80% of those without even scratching our heads, thinking that are these necessary for our security or not. Let's stop paying the money for the leases. Thank you. Leases on those properties. It's simply not keeping us safer, and in fact, again, like these. In fact, let me put it this way. I love New Zealanders. I think New Zealand's a great country, and New Zealanders are neat. However, if New Zealand had an army base or a Air Force base 5 miles out of Phoenix, you'd pretty soon stop. You know, that's awfully noisy, and sometimes the New Zealander troops would get drunk and they'd come in and they'd cause havoc or the rest of this sort of stuff. You'd pretty soon stop liking New Zealanders, right? That's what's happening to us around the world. It's not making us safer, it's actually making us less safe. We're making people mad at us. They're taking our money, but they're not happy with us. I suggest to you that Germany is not going to be attacked by Austria in my lifetime. I say, bring those troops home. There was a woman I actually read in a magazine, this was about a month ago. She lives in a small town in Germany near a U.S. Army base. And she was horrified with the idea that maybe that base would leave. She said, if that base were to move out, we would lose 92% of the revenue from my little town. And you know something? She's probably right. But wouldn't it be better to spend that money here in Phoenix or in Albuquerque or in Nebraska or someplace? This is part of the 43%, and it will not make us less safe. So we can close 80%, I don't know what it will be, we'll look at each one, 85% of those bases, reduce that money expense, and bring our troops home and actually be safer. So those are things that we just start with regard to the Pentagon. And then, I'm going to change gears with you. Education. Our schools all around the nation today are failing our children. Agreed? Some of them are doing okay, but many of them are failing our children. What are we going to do about this? A huge issue. And my answer is, the shoes on your feet. What is he talking about? The shoes on your feet are consumer items. You basically decide what kind of shoes you're interested in buying, what store you want to go to, the style, the color, etc. Basically, you end up buying the shoes for the price you want to pay, and you're pretty much satisfied with it. That's the way all consumers' items are purchased. Your car, your air conditioner, whatever it happens to be, you get pretty much what you want because you are in control of those purchases. They're purchased from the bottom up. Education is completely different. Education is purchased from the top down. You have the Department of Education that actually has a budget of $60 billion every year with 4,600 people working there. They have this money and it comes, they keep a bunch for administration, then that money goes to the states. They keep a bunch for administration with all of the regulations and bureaucracy attached. They give it to the school districts. They keep a lot for administration. It goes to the schools. Most schools are top-heavy with administration, and eventually it comes down. But the consumers, namely the parents, do not have a say as to where their money for their education of their children is going to be spent. If you allow the parents to choose how and where that money would be spent, they would demand excellence. And so, I have a school, and it can be a public school, private school, I don't care. I have a school, we'll call it the gray school, and it's not performing. Okay? What's going to happen? Well, maybe you come and do me the favor, you have children in my school, you'll say, come on, Gray, get it together, or I'm going to go to rain school. Okay, so maybe I get better and you stay. Or maybe I don't and you leave. So now some of my customers, namely the children, are now going to rain school instead. What am I going to do? I'm going to look around and say, wait a minute, what's she doing that I'm not doing, and I'll get better, which is good. Or I won't, which then what would happen? I'll go out of business, which I also say, good. So then someone else will come in and purchase my property, or they'll start another school over here, because we all of this money, potentially. You have these parents holding, you can call them a voucher, a scholarship, I don't care what you call them. They have the ability to say, direct, where this money is going to be going. So they've done this in Milwaukee for the last 5 years. I was in Milwaukee about 2 weeks ago, and they said, you know, Judge Gray, pretty much all of our bad schools are gone. Same thing in New Orleans. They're doing this. It's working. The bad schools leave because the parents demand excellence. They demand innovation. And again, if you have that money there, you have that market there, some people are not performing, others will come in and perform. It's going to work. Who's going to like this? The parents, because they will in fact take their children to where you get good education. The good teachers are going to love this. If I'm a good teacher today, unfortunately, I'm not dumb, and I see where is the money today in our schools? It's in administration. So the better teachers actually progress out of the classroom. Not a good idea. In this system, they will be paid well for being good teachers. We'll have fewer administrators, by the way, with all of these regulations that go back and forth from the feds to the state to the school districts and all the rest of this sort of stuff. The teachers will love it because they will be in demand. And if I have a good teacher and I'm not paying her very much, Rain will entice her away from me because she'll pay her more. So the good teachers will be in demand. They'll make more money. The poor teachers, a lot of them have been beaten up. You know, they find, I've been trying and working hard, but I get paid the same whether I try real hard or not, so they get lazy. So now they're going to start performing again. And if they're really poor teachers, then they're going to be out of luck. To which I say, fine, go to a different job. We're going to reclaim excellence in our schools. Now, why am I talking about this? Because part of the 43% is we should close the Department of Education. We have no reason to have the federal government in education at all. End of discussion. The money will still be there, and we'll still use the same funding, whether it be from the state or the property taxes or whatever, but the parents will have the ability to say where it goes. It could be to a public school, a private school, a military school, even a religious school, as long as they meet certain requirements. But the excellence will come back. The public schools, of course, will do fine because they have a leg up anyway, but one way or the other, we will reclaim excellence. Now, what about the complaint? And the only complaint I really hear from this is, oh, there's some parents that don't care. And unfortunately, I think that's probably true, maybe fewer than we think, but there are parents that don't care. And I'm not going to say in the poorer economic areas, I'm going to say wherever. However, there'll be a coattail effect. And if I'm a parent, and I have 2 children, and I don't care, for one reason or another. But you live next door to me and you do care. My children play with your children. You're going to end up leaving this school. You're going to go to a better school. Now my kids are going to, wait a minute, Harry and Jane are going off to this other school. I want to go there too. It won't take too many. That coattail effect will in effect result in the same thing. We will get excellence back. Governor Gary Johnson and I stand for this system to bring back education, excellence in education to our schools. And that is part of our 43%. The Department of Energy, for heaven's sakes. Why should the federal government be choosing winners and losers in the marketplace? It's silly to have the Department of Energy, which, by the way, again, has a big budget, lots of thousands of workers, that's part of the 43%. In my view, we will eliminate the Department of Energy. For example, today you have the Department of Energy deciding that corn is the best product for ethanol. You know, and ethanol, of course, is used for about 10% of our gasoline. Well, wait a minute. Why should the government be doing this? In fact, I was on a radio talk show out of Iowa. This was about 2 years ago or so, discussing this area, and a farmer came on and said, well, you know, Your Honor, I'm going to talk against my own economic self-interest because I raise corn. However, did you know that hemp actually results in a lot more ethanol per acre than corn does, and corn will clog your carburetors and hemp will not? Now look, this is not my area. I don't know, but let the market figure it out. The market will. And there may be other products as well that do it better. And by the way, are using ethanol, and I've been through Illinois and Indiana, that drought there for the corn crops is really severe. And so, but they still have to use a lot of that crop for ethanol, which has destroyed the tortilla market. It's now resulted in hogs costing more money because let the market do this. The market is perfectly equipped to take care of these sorts of things. So we will actually eliminate the Department of Energy. That's part of the 43%. It goes on and on. And actually, you may remember a fellow by the name of Rick Perry, the governor of Texas. He was actually in the Republican debates and was saying that he was going to eliminate 3 agencies and then he couldn't remember what they are. Well, I do remember. And it's the Department of Energy, the Department of Education, and the Department of Commerce. You know, come on. The Commerce. It isn't helping. It's just another big bureaucracy. The Bureau of Indian Affairs. I think it is downright demeaning. Oh, you're a Native American? You're not able to take care of the education of your children. Poor baby, the government will do it for you. It's downright insulting. Oh, you can't take care of your own land. We'll do it for you. We'll lease it out for you. Now I know we lost several billions of dollars. That's government in action. You know, don't you have a sense of humor? But one way or the other, we get rid of the Department of Bureau of Indian Affairs. I actually heard a story. It's probably not true, but it's a good story anyway, that this man was taking a tour of the Bureau of Indian Affairs office in Washington. And he went inside and he saw it was about a football field in size. It was huge, wall-to-wall desks, phones on the rest, people drinking coffee, having a great time, all laughing and having fun. Then he saw over in the corner and he saw one guy that was in hysterics. He was crying, he was just beside himself. He said, "What's the matter with him?" He said, "Oh, don't worry about Charlie, his Indian died." Well, in so many ways, we have just about one regulator for every Native American in our country. It's time to reduce that sort of thing. So let's look into these things. We have so many agencies of our federal government put in by FDR, put in the 1930s. Maybe they were necessary then, maybe they weren't, but they're the same thing now. They have frequently a different name. Let's conduct our audit. Let's look at the government. We have today what I call an obese federal government. We have so much power that has been accumulated by the federal government, and it is much better to be with the states, much better to be with the people. And by the way, last time I looked, the 9th and 10th Amendments to the Bill of Rights, the United States Constitution, are still there, and they say any power not expressly delegated by the Constitution to the federal government remains with the states and remains with the people. And these are things that if the Constitution is wrong, then let's change it. Otherwise, let's go back to it. It's worked pretty well so far. Let's reduce this obese federal government. We can reduce that spending. So this is what we stand for. I've been talking a lot. There's a lot we can talk about. We haven't gotten into jobs yet, which we also have a plan for, and immigration. It's another thing we should talk about, but I'd rather answer your question. So if you have questions, let's talk about those. Yes.
I have a couple. I can see a solution through the judicial system, your system. A couple solutions. One, something you probably hate as a judge, you've had to deal with, mandatory sentencing. Shouldn't we attack mandatory sentencing and make that completely, like, abolish it? Because that's where a lot of these the pot-smoking criminals or whatever criminals, you know what I mean, they immediately get sentenced something. Guaranteed. If we remove that, then we can take each case-by-case scenario. Don't you think that would help in this war on drugs? The other thing, too, is another solution I see, as you were saying, police were not having enough funds for violent crimes. I'm sorry, it's a two-part. They have not enough...
You're up to part 6 already.
Yeah, I'm sorry. They don't have enough funds for violent crimes and stuff like that. The other solution there is to also, through the judicial system, set up a way where we can have privatized police forces. We will pay the police. We will subscribe to that office. They will come out, and they will want to do a good job. They're not going to waste their time on drugs. They're going to spend their time on real crimes. Don't you think that would be better?
Okay, the first thing is he's saying, well, isn't there something in the whole judicial system that you hate with regard to mandatory minimum sentencing? And the answer is categorically yes. Mandatory minimum sentences are a cop-out. Yes, originally they were passed, at least in California, where they have lots of them, because the people felt, maybe rightly, maybe wrongly, that a lot of judges were simply too lenient and they weren't giving the sentences that they should have. That may have been true back then, but obviously not true now. We have filled our prisons with people to overflowing. However, no one, you may quote me on this, nobody, Congress or anywhere else, has the ability to come up with a fair sentence in advance without knowing who the perpetrator is, what the offense is, what the circumstances were, how the victims were damaged, if at all, any of these things. Yeah. So it simply cannot be done. It is not fair or just for the individual's family, or for the taxpayers. So I say mandatory minimum sentences simply must be abolished, and the answer is yes. If not, you can always put a robe on a computer, but we need people with discretion. What I would do instead, by the way, and I've written a book called Wearing the Robe. It's a how-to book for judges, and my suggestion after I say mandatory minimum sentences simply should no longer be here is actually not well received with a lot of my fellow judges, but I would have a 3-judge panel. Say the 3 of us are involved in a criminal calendar, so everybody that is sentenced by the 3 courts, we would sentence as a panel, which would tend to bring the extremes more into the mainstream or more into the middle, and it would bring more consistent sentences. So that is my suggestion. But yes, in California, again, I can't speak for Arizona, California today, I would venture to say we have tens of thousands of people in prison right this minute that simply should not be there. Simply should not be there. They're geriatrics, they've been there too long. The whole parole system is political, they don't let people out ever anyway. Some people shouldn't have been sentenced there to begin with. We actually have circumstances in which those really judges appointed by those truly liberal presidents like Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan, were literally in tears because the law required them to sentence this poor woman or man or whatever to decades in prison. They were crying at the time, apologizing and saying, but I can't distinguish this. I know you shouldn't be getting 15 years in prison. If I had my ability, I'd give you about 1.5 to 2 years, but the law demands it, and so you end up in prison for 15 years. Let me tell you another story that you should be aware of. I was in juvenile court for several years on the abused and neglected children calendar. And I don't want to exaggerate, maybe every 4 or 5 weeks, I would have the following factual scenario come into my courtroom. There'd be a woman, let's call her a single mother of 2, and she would make a big mistake. Namely, she'd hook up with the wrong boyfriend. And the boyfriend would be basically selling narcotics, and she'd generally know it, but that's kind of the way the hand was dealt. One fine day, he'd come to her and say, well, tell you what, Ellen, if you take this package and take it across town and give it to Charlie, I'll pay you $500. And so she'd generally know it contained narcotics, but gee, I'm going that way anyway. $500 will help pay half my month's rent, so she'd do it. Okay, so she gets arrested, charged, convicted of transporting 3 ounces of cocaine and sentenced to 5 years in prison, which honestly, under today's system, that's not an unreasonable sentence for transporting 3 ounces of cocaine. Let me ask you a question. When the mother is incarcerated, what happens to her children? And the answer is, they come to me on the abused and neglected children calendar because by definition, she's abandoned her children because she's not there to take care of them. So now, I have this woman, she's in a jail jumpsuit, she's in handcuffs, and I look at her and tell her the truth, which is, ma'am, you know you're not going to be a part of your children's lives for the next 5 years. She starts to well up with tears. Wouldn't you? And then I tell her the brutal truth, which is, ma'am, unless you're really lucky and either have a close personal friend or family member both willing and able to take custody of your children, they're probably going to be adopted by somebody else by the time you get out of prison. And she dissolves in tears. Wouldn't you? But if that isn't enough, and regretfully in my town in Orange County, the human factor doesn't really affect people enough, although it should. But if you're a taxpayer, I can dissolve you in tears as well, because for the next year, what are we going to be spending? We're going to be spending about $5,000 per month per child to keep them in a group home before they're adopted. So that's $60,000 per child times 2 children's $120,000 plus another $30,000 to keep the mother incarcerated. We're spending upwards of $150,000 of taxpayer money physically to separate a mother from her children. And that's crazy. And guess who has to enforce that? I do. But I don't have to do it quietly. So at least I talk to you and let you know what's happening. This is a disaster. When I say that drug prohibition is the biggest failed policy in the history of our country, that's not just for laughs. It's not just for jokes. And by the way, on this subject, it does not take a sociologist to go through any jail or prison in our country and see that people of color are vastly overrepresented. It's outrageous. It is not what our country stands for, but that's what's happening. And in fact, you may remember this fellow by the name of Jeb Bush, who was the governor of Florida. And this was maybe, I don't remember, 10 years ago, where it made the national headlines. His 2, I think he had twin daughters, had ended up with drug problems on prescription drugs. You may have heard this or not. And he took to the airwaves and said, we have a family emergency here. We need privacy and we need treatment. And you know something? I sympathize with the fellow, and he's absolutely right. But when people that look like me, we have this family problem, we need privacy and we need treatment. But when it's them, they need jail.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where we are. Hold people accountable for what they do, not what they put into their bodies. Go back on drugs again for a minute. How many of you are aware of what's happened in Portugal for the last 10 years? Good, that's more than usual. Portugal had a problem in the year 2000 that they found out that actually their country had a bigger drug problem than any country in the European Union. So they did something really intelligent. They actually organized a commission made up of, listen to this, non-political experts. And they said, go out into the country, figure out what's going on, come back and report to us. And they did. 2001, they came back and reported. And they said, we have two things that are going wrong. Number one is the problem drug users in our country are not going to bring their problems to the government. Why? Because if they do, the government will punish them, so they take them underground. Number two, the government is spending so much money on the investigation, prosecution, incarceration of these people, we don't have any money left for drug treatment. So, unbeknownst to the world, except for a few people here, Portugal did something unusual. In 2001, 11 years ago, they decriminalized all drugs.
Yeah.
They decriminalized all drugs. Now, these terms mean something. Decriminalized means it's still a violation of law to buy, use, possess, sell any of these drugs, but as long as you stay within very well-known general guidelines, the police are instructed, often in writing, to look the other way and leave you alone. Now, in Portugal today, because this is still going on, they found that if a police officer sees you and you're under the influence of these drugs, or you're using these drugs, you're possessing these drugs, you're still given a citation, but instead of coming to see a judge, you'll actually be sentenced or ordered to go see some medical professionals. Then they sit you down. Tell you what, Alan, what's your drug usage? How you doing? What can we do to help? And all the rest of that. So actually, they found in Portugal, the Cato Institute performed this study. They digested all of this information in about 2010 and came out with the results. That drug usage in Portugal remained the same. Now look, every drug czar we've ever had has been quoted as saying, if we were to change our policy, we'd become a nation of drug zombies. Everybody would use drugs, all that sort of stuff. That's not only insulting, but it's silly. But in Portugal, it was shown not to be true. Drug usage remained the same, did not increase at all, but problem drug usage went down by 50%. Why? For exactly that reason. Now, when people have a drug problem, they will come to the government, they will get the citation, they'll talk with medical professionals, and they're able to start working with people and helping them control their use. It's gone down by 50%. We should do the same thing here. We lead the world in the incarceration of our people, both by sheer numbers as well as per capita. And here, I assure you, we're number one does not make me proud. Romney and Obama, they'll continue with this war on drugs. And in fact, you can elect Romney, you can re-elect Obama, there won't be any medical marijuana dispensaries in our country within a year or two the way we're going. That each one has said, oh, we've got to close them down, violation of federal law. Obama's going around the country, a lot in California, but elsewhere as well, notoriously using the DEA, close down these medical marijuana dispensaries. It's crazy. Why?
How does it get them?
I do not know the answer to that, because Obama actually sent a memo through Eric Holder, who is now still his Attorney General. This was about 2 or 3 years ago, saying that we're not going to... Yeah, okay. And actually, Obama, when he ran, he was asked, the old Clinton joke, because he'd acknowledged using marijuana, so he's asked, well, did you inhale? Ha-ha. And you know what Obama's response was? It was the most refreshing response I've ever heard from a politician. He looked at him and said, sure, I inhaled. I thought that was the whole idea. That was good. It was candid. Michael Phelps, by the way, pretty good swimmer. He's used marijuana a lot. The only harmful thing that's happened to him with regard to that was when he got caught. I talked to lots of police officers, beat cops, patrol officers. I've asked probably the question 100 times, have you ever gone to a domestic violence disturbance that was marijuana related? They look at you and laugh and say, no, it's always alcohol, cocaine, or methamphetamines. The worst thing that somebody, and I don't use marijuana, I'm not interested. But the worst thing that will happen with somebody that overindulges with marijuana is they'll laugh at silly jokes. That sort of stuff. I mean, it's crazy. So, in fact, like we were hearing earlier from Andre, he's a good source of information. He says, we don't have a war on drugs. We just have a war on some drugs. My drug of choice is alcohol. Far worse than marijuana will ever be. So these are the things we just need to legitimize the discussion. Yes, sir. It's about time I got a question.
I was wondering if you could speak about the growth of the private prison industry. If you have anything to say about it or not.
The question is, can I speak with regard to the growth of private prisons in the United States? Yes. I actually think private prisons are fine. I don't have any problem with it at all. If you go to England, for example, the private prisons there are actually cost less. They actually have less violence in them. They have more rehabilitation and the rest of that stuff for people. The problem is not with private prisons. The problem is you simply cannot allow the private prison industry to decide who goes there, how long they stay, how many people. That must be a public function. But otherwise, it's okay. So they don't get involved with parole decisions, although anybody would be better, most parole officers. The problem is then, you say, oh, but they can have lobby efforts, and which they can, and I understand this. However, today, the strongest lobby group in California is the Prison Guards Union. So one way or the other, you're going to have the lobbying, you're going to have to be careful. But the problem is not private prisons in my standpoint. Do you have a follow-up? Yes.
Well, my follow-up would be, isn't there, though, a vested interest for them to keep people detained, or for the system to keep people detained, because they don't function at a profitable level unless they have like 90%.
Okay. Isn't there, and that's a good follow-up question, and isn't it true, and in fact, in some states, they actually, before they have these contracts, the state guarantees that they'll have at least, I don't know, 90% occupancy or whatever else. And he's asking a very legitimate question. Don't they have a vested interest in keeping more people there for longer so that they can make this money? Yes, they do to some degree, although again, if they're not the ones that determine how long somebody will be there or where they are, that problem pretty much goes away. So there's going to be a problem regardless. I think that the private prisons, though, actually, it's pretty much like what's doing a better job today, Federal Express or the post office. Private industry does a better job. It certainly does a better job in England. I think they are here too. But those are all issues to be concerned about. Yes, yes.
I'm just wondering if you feel part of the 43% would be the obesity of the federal policing. We used to just have FBI, CIA. Now I think I can count 10 different divisions of police.
The question is, would part of the 43% be regarding federal policing? And the answer has to be yes. By the way, and I didn't mention this, but a major plank, it's on everyone's interest. It's on everybody's concern, and that is jobs. In fact, there's not a soundbite here. Give me 4 minutes and I'll discuss this. Today, you heard probably the presidential debates. And Romney and Obama, they don't have a clue about how they're going to do this. They don't have any new ideas. They talk about, well, let's give a tax break here, let's take a tax break away there. That's pretty much it. They're nibbling around the edges. We need an institutional change. This is a huge problem. And what we're going to do is actually repeal the income tax. We're going to abolish the IRS. Now, what difference does this make for jobs? First of all, although off the subject, the general
elected.
Yeah, okay. I was disappointed not to hear some applause before this. Way to go, Ray. But look, the General Accountability Office estimates that we as individuals and companies pay somewhere in the order of $260 to $600 billion every year simply to keep tax records and to prepare our income taxes. All that money would be saved without even talking about what taxes you would pay. I think that would be a good thing. You'd have businesses being able to make business decisions for business reasons instead of tax reasons. Individuals be able to make personal decisions for personal reasons instead of tax reasons. You could sell your house now, oh, but no, my capital gains would be too. That'd all be gone. So that would be good. That's not a reason to do it, but it sure isn't a bad benefit. What's the reason to do it? Our products, right here, you can look at them, are domestic goods for export. They're agricultural goods, they're manufactured goods, have an artificial problem, a discrepancy against them because they have paid taxes on them before they leave our shores. The companies have paid income taxes, payroll taxes, and that's all included in the cost of them before they're used as exports. They are competing with goods around the world that have not paid taxes on them, so they have that artificial disadvantage. Same thing in reverse. You have lots of goods from around the world, I don't know, Singapore, Brazil, Japan, wherever, I'll get to you in a minute, in which they are coming into our country as imports, competing with our domestic goods that have paid taxes on them, and everybody pays the same sales taxes. If we were to repeal the income tax, we'd level the playing field, then everyone would have a retail consumption tax and pay the same taxes on them at that point. I'm doing a lot of flying, as you can imagine, recently, and I was sitting next to an executive from Nike, you know, the shoe manufacturer. He looked at me as we were discussing this. Literally, his eyes got big, and he said, "Judge Gray, this is sensational. If we were to repeal the income tax, most companies would bring their manufacturing back to the United States of America." That's called a reverse outsourcing. It means millions and millions of jobs.
Yes.
We're not messing around here. That's what we would do. Just to complete the thought, some people are against this because, oh, it's progressive, it's against the poor. And I understand that. Governor Johnson has a response. He has a response saying, okay, for every adult in the country, we're going to have a rebate. How much will this tax be? I don't know. My estimate is maybe somewhere between 8 and 12%. But let's say it was 20, just for purposes of discussion. I don't think it'd be that high, but let's say it would be. Every adult in our country would get a rebate or credit every month for $200. That means that if you spent $1,000 on goods and services, you'd end up paying no taxes. Actually, if you were really poor and spent less than that, less than $1,000 on goods and services, you'd actually make money on the deal. So nobody'd have a gripe. And then every dollar you'd spend over $1,000, yes, you'd pay 20% to this retail consumption tax. But by the way, before you get too upset, everybody that works today gets a payroll check. You're not going to have any withholding for federal income tax, for Social Security. All of this comes out of your consumption tax, so you can have a lot more money in your pocket. So this is a good idea. Okay? And that would talk about eliminating the IRS. That's part of our 43% as well. That is a major thing. And imagine the fraud, the administration, the bureaucracy that we would do away with. How many of you people feel that the income tax system we have today is fair, workable, and equitable? I mean, of course not. I mean, this is something that people would be willing to do. And most states already have sales taxes in operation, so the equipment is already there. This is just one of our bases. That's part of the 43%. Yes?
So I just wanted to take it back to like the human impact of incarceration. I wanted to share a couple stories, you know, that I think I've shared with you before, and then
Yes.
see what your response or description would be. Basically, I've done a lot of work with people who are coming out of prison, and I've recently had a friend who he was homeless and he had prescription medications, and he did not have his prescriptions on him. He had like a mild DUI, and the police searched him because he was homeless and found prescription medications, and then he was put in. He didn't find this out until he was going to lose his access benefits, and he was in an epileptic state when he got there, and you know, for having his own prescription medications, he could have had his probation violated and returned to prison just for having prescription medications on him and being a homeless man. And the other thing that I would say is, I see women who get trapped into these drug cycles, like when I used to work in Watts and doing reentry, and got to work for a really interesting agency called the Women's Life Reentry Project. And they were doing advocacy for reentry because Los Angeles is facing a huge crisis of reentry of people coming out of prison with no resources, things like that. And we just, the women that we would house, their lives are devastated.
Yes. Well, put yourself in my place. As a judge, I've come out very publicly against this. I've been doing it for 20 years. And pretty much maybe every 2 weeks, I get an email from someone or a call about some yet other, and I'll call them an atrocity because that's exactly what they are. There are lots and lots of these things. Let me tell you another one. I don't know about Phoenix, but I can tell you, Orange County, where I'm from, Los Angeles County, what is the biggest mental health facility in the county? It is the county jail. Imagine the amount of harm. Oh yes, by far.
Yeah.
Imagine the amount of harm we are doing to these mentally fragile people. And it's my personal experience, anecdotally, that in fact, my daughter is bipolar, and she's had drug problems, and she basically used methamphetamine. She self medicates with methamphetamines. The girls seem to do it with methamphetamines and the guys seem to do it with cocaine. That's just kind of my experience. But one way or the other, imagine the amount of money we're spending on it's the most expensive treatment, quote unquote, or response that we could do. Imagine the harm that we are perpetrating upon these mentally fragile people. It's just another exercise in this. So it goes on and on and on. You listen to a mother who said, you know, my son, yes, he's not saying he's blameless, and yes, he was using drugs, but then he started getting back on the road, and he had a job, and he was making himself better, and then for some reason he got arrested for being in possession of a small amount of cocaine, and now it's a felony. Now he's lost everything he's done, and we're spending $30,000 a year to keep him back in prison. And I went through Norco State Prison. It's actually just across the border from Orange County into Riverside County, and it really looks, it could be out of central casting. It just looks really, it has the turrets and the cow and all the rest of the stuff. It really looks like a prison. I went on a tour of this thing, and they said that we are not allowed to give drug treatment to misdemeanors for people that are, for felonies that are in here, for people that have drug problems, because we don't have the money. And so the recidivism rate within a year was 85%. 85% of those people would be back in prison within a year. You might as well almost not even release them. What chance do they have? Look, if I'm a cocaine addict and I'm in jail for whatever, prison for whatever reason, I go in as an addict, I can't get enough, I can get all the drugs I want in prison, believe me, but they're more expensive. So I can't maintain my habit, and I don't get any treatment, and so when I get out of prison, I'm still a cocaine addict, but I'm going to try to do a good job. I'm going to try to stay straight. I don't want to go back in prison, but I'm rendered unemployable. Oh, if you fill out a resume or a job application, where have you been the last 3 years? Well, you know, I've been in prison. That pretty much takes care of that. Or whatever. You're rendered unemployable, so you can't get a job. So then you start in despair. Let me ask you a question. If you have somebody that's depressed and is a cocaine addict, what's that he or she going to do? They're going to go back to using cocaine. You need to make some money for your family. So you go back to the only thing that you can do to make money, which is sell drugs. So it's self-perpetuating. It's tragedy after travesty, including for the taxpayers. So we stand up for you. We stand up for humanity. We stand up for the taxpayer. Governor Gary Johnson is the right guy. I was quoted as saying that he's the most qualified person to be president of the United States that I know of. He understands education. He has come out showing his courage with regard to the war on drugs. He didn't have to do any of this sort of thing. He understands financial responsibility. Folks, we are in the mainstream of American political thought. We are both financially responsible and socially tolerant. No one is going to accuse Mr. Obama of being financially responsible, and no one is going to accuse Mr. Romney of being socially tolerant. We are in the political mainstream. If only we could get just the attention, be considered to be viable, get the exposure, we'd win this election. If we could just be a part of the debates. Imagine, you saw the debates, you have Gary Johnson in there too, with real ideas, real background. Gary Johnson has more administrative experience as we speak than both Romney and Obama combined. He's the guy. He actually took, when he graduated from college, he actually started his own handyman company from his own garage, and he was the handyman. Okay? He turned that into the largest construction company in New Mexico. He had 1,000 employees. He gave value. He made payroll. He didn't lay off anybody when times got tough. He's a good man, a responsible man, an experienced man, and then he's been a successful 2-term governor. So when he asked me to be his running mate, I said, I will do it. I mean, I've already called him the most responsible, most qualified person to be president. What am I supposed to say? So I said, yes, I will do it, but only on one condition, and that is we run to win. None of this moral victory stuff, none of this let's make a good showing, plan for the future. We're running to win. He completely agreed. And then he told me something that you should be aware of, as if you need more. And that is, Jim, throughout this election campaign, if you have different ideas than I do, feel free to discuss them publicly. What does that say about this guy? How many of you ever heard of a presidential candidate that told his running mate that he could disagree with him in public? But it says he has no ego to get in the way. He says he wants correct information, and for somehow I can come up with something that works better. He wants to hear it. He wants to do the right thing for the right reason. I swear to you, that Obama did not say that to Joe Biden. I swear to you. You know, this is something that we really have to go to. So I'm going to end this. If you have further questions, I will be the last one out the door. But I will tell you, at this point, we have not been in the debates. If we're not in the debates, we're not going to win the election. But even so, what we have is something that the people of the United States of America not only want and crave, but if they see that we're viable, they will demand. We will put in a coalition government in Washington. That means, yes, we'll have libertarians, yes, we'll have independents highly placed in our administration, but we'll also have Republicans and Democrats as long as they agree with our approach of being financially responsible and socially tolerant. And then, when we have all of this, what I call bipolar politics going on in Washington, where they can't get along, they're playing political games, whatever, we'll have their compatriots go out into their political parties with the Democrats, Republicans, whatever, and say, come on, guys, get on board. This is a good idea. Support it. We'll give credit to anybody that has a good idea, anybody that embraces a good idea, unlike what is happening today. You can elect Romney, you can re-elect Obama. They will never be able to do this. We can, and we will. So it's the most exciting thing that's happened to me since the birth of my children. And I'm here to tell you, my final comment, I know I promised this twice. A hero of mine, a fellow by the name of Thomas Jefferson, who I anticipate you've heard of, was actually in France when we finally ratified the Constitution. And he wrote back and said, congratulations, this is great, however. In a fragile democracy, in a fragile republic that we have, we're going to have a revolution every generation. Why? Because of the private sector, the private interests that will inveigle their way into power, will sap our vitality and sap our strength. How many generations has it been since Jefferson said this? And I am here proudly, in fact, excitedly to tell you, I deeply believe the revolution at last is here. With Governor Gary Johnson and Judge Jim Gray. We need you to get the word out and help us get this word out. Send our email, our website, GaryJohnson2012.com. Send the link to all of your friends by email. Talk it up. At least get us this 5%. That's a fallback position. It's not defeatist talk, but if we just get 5%, that means that in 2016 in the presidential election, we'll be able to have matching funds from the government. We'll be able to get on the ballot without having to go through all of these hoops and petitions and everything else. It will be historic. It will be the beginning of the end of the two-party system, and having us there in the mainstream will require the radical extremes on both sides to come more to the middle. So again, it's the most exciting thing that's happened to me since the birth of my children. I'm proud to be Gary Johnson's running mate, proud to be able to share some thoughts with you. Now let's get it done. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Good night.
I have one question for you, Judge. You mentioned that the end of Prohibition is going to bring so many wonderful things for us, and I just would like you to kind of outline that for us.
I'm not saying...
What will the end of Prohibition bring for us?
Okay, I'm not saying the end of Prohibition will bring wonderful things.
Societal benefits.
I am saying that it will reduce so many harms. There's huge problems in our society today with the drug issues. 10% of them are drugs themselves. You know, I'm not minimizing them. They can be harmful. They can be addictive, all the rest of that. But 10% is drugs. 90% is drug prohibition. 90% is the drug money harms. So just like when we finally came to our senses and repealed alcohol prohibition, you know, at least when we got rid of the bathtub gin problems, you know, the impurities in the alcohol, they went away overnight. At least we didn't have the equivalent of Coors when they have a distribution problem with Budweiser. They didn't take guns to the streets like they did in alcohol prohibition. They file a complaint, they come to me. Crime. You don't understand. The year after we repealed alcohol prohibition, homicides went down by 40% the next year and continued to drop each year thereafter until the beginning of the Second World War. I'm convinced that the same phenomenon will occur in our country when we repeal drug prohibition. You know, bring people like they did in Portugal that are having drug problems closer to medical professionals that can help them instead of rendering them automatic criminals and pushing them farther away. We'll prosecute a lot more using our resources, because again, you only have so many resources in the criminal justice system for the crimes that are causing us harm. Robbery, rape, murder, burglary, etc. We'll use those, so crime will go down that way. And yes, we need prisons, without question, although we will free up a lot of prison space, because there are tens of thousands of people, if not hundreds of thousands of people in our country today that simply should not be there. So it's a reduction of these harms. That's what I'm promising, and that will happen. Okay? Thank you again. Good luck to us all.
All right, so now what? What's our next step?
You know somebody that lives in Colorado, Washington, or Oregon?
I do.
And can vote there?
They will.
Get on the horn. Get them to tell their friends.
Yeah.
Send our email, our website out.
Okay.
Tell them to take it. You take it personally. Tell them to take it personally. Get this information out there. We can't help but progress. Okay?
Hey, I think I want to try and get at least 5% in this state. And I know some people in Washington, Colorado, Oregon. I don't know anybody there.
That's all right.
Meet them.
Facebook.
Make some new friends.
Yeah, all of that.
Absolutely.